Right, so this example traces the data that's coming into it. So at the bottom we've got the raw data, which is just the mouse input, and every frame it's getting a data point, and the top is tracing that using easing primitives. So what it does is it has a head, which you can see as the red part, and so long as it can approximate everything in its input buffer, which is shown by the red part, using an easing function, then it will continue to record it into the input buffer. And as soon as it can't anymore, it needs to start a new curve, then it will push that into a keyframe and then reset the input buffer. So that means what it can do is, if I press S now, for example, it's going to play a sine curve, and it's going to approximate it out of easing primitives. So it kind of fits together out of available easing primitives whatever input data you give it. So this is good for recording live and later having less data to deal with, say when you're wanting to make it into a curve. Okay, so the controls are simple. It's S toggles this sine curve, space resets to the left-hand side of the screen. The other control, which you might be interested in, is if you go into TweenTraceBuffer.h, scroll down to the constructor of TweenTraceBuffer. Here it says float threshold. If you change this threshold, then it will be more forgiving. So it'll be more forgiving of how well it fits it. So you can see now it's kind of like really rough. And it's using all the possible primitives. So it's using things like bounds, exponential, sine, and everything to try and fit these. So it creates a dictionary of available tweening primitives. Easing dictionary here, which is built up at the beginning, and it does all of them in and out. So here it goes through and adds all the functions, and for every function it adds the in, the out, and the in out version, and then all the keyframes. So then data goes to an input buffer, which is a class, and every time is added. Every point is a time and a value, and basically every frame, when it adds something, it makes sure whether or not it can trace the entire input buffer with one of the primitives, one of the easing functions. If it can, then it will continue. If it can't, then it will remove the last frame, and then it certainly will be able to do it with an easing primitive, because if it's got one frame in the input buffer, it definitely can. If it's got two, it definitely can. If it's got three, then it maybe can. And if it can't, then it can always do it with two. So it's always one less than the current amount that it will use to create the keyframe, and the keyframe is an easing function. A start point and end point, where again a point is defined as time and value. Okay, so I hope this somewhat helps with what you need. So I guess the thing is you'll need to be able to make it so the user can change this threshold of how accurate this needs to be whilst they're doing the recording. And then maybe like in the timeline you might have like next to send ask, you might have a smaller button which is for recording ask, or some kind of panel which deals with that. Okay. That's it.